Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Greatness Engineering Hour show. I know you've seen me before this morning, but I'm back. I'm back with another guest and an interesting guest, and you're gonna learn a lot today because we're going to talk about mindset, limitation, and money. So, my guest today is gonna help us to understand the money mindset and how to elevate our emotional and financial glass ceiling. So, stay tuned, have your pen and paper ready because I know that you're going to be inspired. I know that you're going to learn a lot. But what I really want you is to really, pay attention, participate if you are here. And for those who are going to catch up the show later on, please don't hesitate to comment and give your insights so that I can address them later on with my guest. So, who is the guest? I know you're very curious to know. My guest today is Melissa Kim Corter. She's a best-selling author, intuitive coach, and clinical hypnotherapist. So, she helps women overcome money and visibility blocks with evidence-based and spiritual approach. So she guides entrepreneurs to manifest increased level of financial and emotional success with their, heightened intuition. And Melissa is also a mentor. She mentors entrepreneurs to own their message and gift, and while they can activate, their potential. So I'll get Melissa to talk a little bit more about what she says and what she does, and we're really gonna have a great and open conversation about emotional blocks and financial blocks and how we can remove them. So I'm not gonna I'll give her the opportunity to introduce herself in detail, to tell us a little bit about her background and how she's actually helping people to remove all those blocks that I've just mentioned. So, like I said, you get in, take your pen, take your paper, and I'm going to bring Melissa right now so that we can have a great conversation and understand how we can, remove those blocks, emotional and financial, and get to become the best version of ourselves because that's what this show is all about. So don't go anywhere. I'm coming back with Melissa.
Is it all right? Okay, let's get started right into it. And that is the power of labels, right?
On memories, but as I got older, I started to be more aware of some of the abusive sides of
So good morning, Melissa. Welcome to the Greatness Engineering Hour show. It's such a pleasure to have you, especially it's quite early on your side, and and I'm quite excited to get to talk about money blockages, especially at this really challenging time, and where all the emotions are very high and lots of fears going on, and people not really knowing what to do. So it's quite on time right now for myself and for my audience. So before we get into, the conversation, just want to know, I mean, who is Melissa, and, how did you come to do what you do right now?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to speak with you, connect with you, and with your audience. And one of the things that I discovered on this journey into finding this work and beginning to work with money and emotions and all these different concepts when it comes to mindset was my own struggle, my own struggles with it, noticing patterns that I couldn't quite understand why they kept repeating, the cycles in my own life that were showing up. And some of those cycles looked like an influx of money, and then it would go out. It would come in, it would go out. And it was very tumultuous. It didn't seem to have any logic to it. And so I really, at this point in my career, as I was noticing these things, I already had a bit of a background in psychology, and I started to learn more about hypnosis, the subconscious mind. I wanted to really look at it from all different angles and have a more well-rounded approach in my work. And so I used myself as my greatest guinea pig. And basically what happened is I would wake up and I would have this fear in my body. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach every time I went to look at my bank account, every time I went to pay a bill, every time I had to use or work with money, even asking clients for money for the exchange for my services. I struggled with all of it. And I knew there was something going on, but no matter what I did as far as reading about different ways to shift that mindset, whatever I did with all these different approaches and modalities, nothing really seemed to help me get it at that core level. There was always a layer of discomfort when it came to working with money. And so that was sort of the beginning for me, and wanting to really explore, what is this? Why do I feel this way? I know I'm an intelligent person. I know that I am really good at what I do. Why is this happening? And it was through that exploration that I discovered a couple different modalities combined with certain communication patterns that helped me understand that money was simply a mirror for me to show all the other things going on underneath the surface within my emotions that I was not wanting to look at or face, some things that brought up guilt or shame. And what I realized is that, the subject of money is really loaded for a lot of us. For many of us, we can talk about prosperity. We can say abundance, prosperity, and feel a little bit more safe or okay to speak those words or talk about it. But the minute we say money, something happens to a lot of us. It changes. And so I just really explored that. And I went through a lot of various trainings and inner work and introspection to discover my blocks, to work through them, to heal them, and then to see what was possible on the other side of basically having a different inner narrative when it came to money. But it was more than just working with the level of the mind. There was a lot that had to go on within my nervous system to undo the discomfort, the feelings, the automatic responses and reactions my body had when it came to making financial decisions.
And that's important to know, because a lot of people, and myself included, at some point look at money more from a material thing and something that is external, more than something that is starting from the inside and then producing what we see on the outside. So I mean, what are the key finding that you realize, and came through working, not only looking at yourself, but working with other people? What do you think were the key thing that were causing those blocks and really paralyzing people in a way?
Absolutely. Beautiful question. It really came down to understanding their relationship to money. I've worked with countless people in these processes, and there are some very common themes that come up for people. One of them is the automatic response that there's not going to be enough, no matter how much they have, no matter how much is coming in, no matter what's going on in their bank account. And even though some people start to, let's say they receive a raise or a little bit more comes in, that those underlying feelings and emotions are still there. They just become sort of dampened down because we're looking in the present moment at what we have. But underneath all that, there's a feeling, usually a story in the mind, a feeling in the body, or some kind of a response. But because we are not necessarily trained to see those things or understand those things, we avoid it. So a lot of my background's in psychology too. And one of the things about just human behavior is it's just a common concept. We will gravitate towards pleasure and we'll run from pain. It's the pleasure principle. And so we take that and we think about money and that discomfort that many of us have about the whole subject, thinking about it, working with it, whatever it might be. There's usually some automatic responses that happen within the individual the minute they go to pay a bill or to work with money on some level. And what happens is, because of that pleasure principle, we might feel or have an awareness of the discomfort. We might have an awareness of the thoughts in the mind of, how did I get here? Why is this happening to me? What am I going to do? Those kind of things. But because they're uncomfortable, instead of investigating those, we turn away with an action, a behavior, another thought. We might try to override those thoughts. We might try to talk ourselves out of feeling that way. And what I've discovered is, when we actually lean into the discomfort, we can understand why it's there, where it stemmed from, where it possibly began for us, which is really truly back in early childhood for many people, because while we are forming our personality, we're making all these unconscious decisions about our world, our level of safety and comfort, our relationships to self and others, our relationship to money. And so it really starts in those formative years, but most of us don't make those connections because we're thinking about the present moment, the discomfort of, how am I going to pay this, or what am I going to do? When really, if we trace it back, there's likely a similar feeling or sensation that you felt at some point in your life that probably had to do with an unfinished experience. So I call these our impactful moments. Some people might label it as a traumatic experience, and that's true and possible for sure. But sometimes it's just an impactful moment where we had something either happen to us or we witnessed it in others. And in that moment that we witness that, there's a story that forms, a decision that's made. And that then reflects itself throughout our life until we learn to look at it, address it, and help process it through the nervous system.
So, I mean, so what you're saying is that it can actually be generational. It's that,
Absolutely.
that's something that it passed from one generation to another. But then, how do you? I know you've mentioned it. Is that, when do you have? What can be a trigger? I mean,
Sure.
what can trigger you to say, okay, I'm not in the right path right now, and I need to look at, back at my history, or history with money, or history in my family, and then try to connect the dot. What was the breakthrough on your side, for example?
For me, there were so many breakthrough moments, but one of the breakthrough moments came about 6 or 7 years ago, when I woke up. And I just woke up with anxiety. I woke up with a lot of anxiety. I felt sick to my stomach. And what had happened is, the night before, I was stressed. I was thinking about, what am I going to do? My savings is diminishing, and I was having a hard time with work at that time. And so it was very much on my mind before I went to sleep. But when I woke up in that panic attack with anxiety and all of it, I knew right then and there, I'm like, I have to get a grip on this. I have to figure this out. And I was still at that point very much in my head, trying to work it through that way. And what I tried to do that really became a shift, I gave myself permission to write it out. So I got my journal and I wrote it all out, what I was afraid of, what I was feeling, my stress, all of it. I needed somewhere for it to go so that I wasn't just containing it in my own mind. That was the first step. It's sort of like being able to talk to a good friend and trust that they're holding that space for you and honoring you. It was a very similar cathartic experience where I was just dumping into this journal, but I had the tears, my body was reacting, I was sobbing, and after I got it all out, there was this sense of very, very, very subtle comfort. Even though nothing had changed yet, I still didn't know what I was going to do. There was an ease and comfort in my body that was not familiar or common. That got my attention. And I decided, how can I work with this more? What is this about? Then some more studying came in. So I learned about different modalities and tools and things like that. But being able to take that first step for me and say, I need this to go somewhere, the anxiety, stress, I needed to do something with it. That was pivotal in opening the door to exploring my own trigger. And the trigger in that moment for me was, there's not going to be enough, which connected to a story in my mind of, I'm not going to have enough. There's not going to be enough. That when I was able to examine that as an observer, because that's the key to this too, is a lot of times when we talk about money or we look at it, there's a lot of intensity that comes with that. There's a lot of emotion that people are sort of consumed by. And so if we can move some of that emotion first, then look at it as an observer, we start to get some insight into what's really going on in these patterns. Why am I being triggered? What is the trigger? Is this something that's happened to me before? Is this something that I witnessed in my family growing up? Like you mentioned, the generational, that's where that insight can start to come in. But it's really hard for us to get that when we're reacting to not having enough. So that's really a big part of the process, is first getting what I would call stable, so we can relax the physical body. Because the other thing that happens is we go into fight or flight. So money it can really trigger the human nervous system, and that's why we want to run away. We want to avoid it. We don't want to deal with it. We don't know what to do, and so we'll turn away. But if we turn into it and say, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I know I am going to open to some kind of solution if I stay present to what I'm feeling and start to uncover what's going on here. The minute we do that and we start to get some of the insight to those pieces of why it's there, what it's here to teach us, we will literally change the brain to start thinking differently. And as soon as that happens, we're creating these new neural pathways within the brain. And then what happens in that external outer world is we start to see things showing up differently from those internal shifts. That's really key for people, because sometimes they get, I tend to work with a lot of people that follow many spiritual concepts and things like that. And sometimes within that, there can even be fear of, I don't want to write it out because it's negative. I don't want to talk about it because it's negative. I don't want to look at it because it's negative. And they have fear that they're going to somehow draw more of that into their life. But it's quite the opposite. If we look at it, we're letting it out so that we can actually do something about it. So we're not drawing more of it into our lives.
And that's a key point that you just mentioned, the fact that because it's negative, we don't want to write it down. We don't want to think about it because we think that, we're going to bring more of it. Because a lot of philosophy right now, it's about, okay, you have to be positive, affirmation, and forget about, thinking about the negative part of your life. And so people have a lot of problem, going back there. And that's, again, another blockage that actually apparently aggravates, the problem. So, I mean, as when you've reached this stage where you've identified, what are the blockages and the link between, your basically understand your money story, are you safe? Are you not going to go back to at some point, your old self and really get yourself again back there? How do you make sure it doesn't happen?
This is such a great question. That's great, a great question for because there's many answers to this. One of the things that I notice is it's a progression. So for some people doing this work, they can have a beautiful breakthrough that's very clear, really powerful, and quick. Other people, that same breakthrough might come over time from working through, because there's many layers to this. So for example, some of us might have 18 or 20 or 30 different examples of how money was mirrored to us as a child in uncomfortable patterns or situations. So we might have witnessed a parent losing a job. We might have witnessed moments of not having enough. We might have experienced being robbed or having things taken from us. So there's so many reasons why. And so when it comes to the actual healing of it, it's sort of a progression. So even though I love those moments where things can absolutely change in a second once having that an awareness or that breakthrough, it's more like the layers of an onion that we start to peel back. And every now and then we'll get to a core. And that would be something that happened earlier on, probably between the ages of 6 and 8, before the personality is being formed. Before we're 12 is where we're really forming that personality. And those are the pivotal years that I find a lot of these things are from, that occurred from. And so what happens is, some people are addressing the things that happened when they were 12 or 15 or 21, and which is absolutely perfect, and we want to look at those things. But once we get to some of the earlier roots, that's when I notice the bigger breakthroughs, because those bigger breakthroughs in those moments tend to kind of unwind some of the other layers that are there. Now, when it comes to this, though, a lot of people really want to, they have a hard time acknowledging, because sometimes other people are involved. And that's another thing I notice with people. They hold a little bit of guilt or shame, because let's say that some of their patterns are connected to a loved one that they witnessed behavior or things like that. It's hard for us to sometimes work through those things, because we don't want to blame someone, especially someone we love or care about. And so what we also want to do is look at this very objectively, that we're not blaming anyone. Actually, we're just taking responsibility. And like what you had just mentioned, making sure it doesn't come forward or continue. Part of that is deciding who we are today, what we want to create for ourselves, our lives, our businesses today. And then we look at the identity that's associated with the present moment, and the identity that's associated with those past patterns and all the other people that could have been an influence, not to put the blame on them, but in fact to actually, what I would say, like, call back our power from, or our attention from, to say, what did I learn from this? What did I learn from watching one of my parents lose their job? What did I learn from them and witnessing their behavior and how they struggled, or what their beliefs were about money? And I feel like when we can do that objectively, it helps that identity shift, because we start to go, oh, you know what? I do think that sometimes myself, and maybe that's not serving me anymore. So you know what? I'm going to work on thinking differently about this. And I feel it's those subtle changes and shifts that I feel like lead to those bigger breakthroughs, but it's the consistency that can also help, so that we don't continue to carry these things forward. And sometimes there's multiple layers of wisdom that we're meant to learn within an experience. And that's why we can think that we've worked through something or we've healed something. And all of a sudden, 3 months later, 3 years down the road, we might revisit a certain aspect of that. And it's not that we didn't do the work. It's just that there's some more there for us to learn from.
And so that it's a continuous process, basically, because there's always the chance of you know, going back to the old you, if you don't continue to do the work and be conscious about, you know, your emotions and what's going on and how they manifest on the outside. So we're gonna take a break, and for those joining us just now, my guest today is Melissa. Melissa is based in the US, and we're talking about money and emotional blocks, and she's helping us to understand, you know, the connection between the two, and how we can remove those ceilings that we've put in our, you know, for ourselves. and understand, how to optimize this connection. So don't go anywhere. We're gonna have a short break, and we'll be back to continue the conversation with Melissa. So we are back. We are back with Melissa. We are having a very deep conversation about money and emotional blockages. And I'm actually learning a lot today because now I understand a little bit about, my shortcoming. And it's quite scary. So it's very important. So, I mean, just to continue, the discussion with all of that. So how do we move forward in a way? I mean, is there a specific process? Obviously we talked a little bit, but is it something linear, or is it something? Do you have different systems, different tools? How do we put all of this together to be able to, constantly be in line and in motion with our money energy, if I can and express myself that way.
Yes, I love this. I love this. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's not just one way. And that's why this is really important that you also honor and listen to your body and pay attention to how you feel. So, and it sounds very simple, but honestly, a lot of us don't necessarily do that. We're very busy. We're in our heads, or we're rushing through life, and we're not necessarily taking the time to slow down to actually listen. So there's a few ways that I like to work with people on this. The first is for people to just start to stabilize, because if someone is in an extremely heightened state of fear, it is hard to work with them to get them to first be to calm enough and to ground enough so that we can actually get through to the mind, because the mind is trying to protect us. It's always trying to protect us and tell us, we got to be on alert. We have to look out. And because of the nervous system is designed for our survival as humans, we're often triggered to take actions that are often based in fear versus what's actually good for us. And so that's one of the first things that I look at when I work with people is, where are we in this level of fear? Now, some of us, we're not thinking about it all the time. It might just be when it comes to paying a bill, looking at our paycheck, or thinking about work. There might be very specific scenarios where it shows up for us, but other people are feeling it every day, all the time, especially with what you mentioned with the state of our world right now, with COVID and with the various economies and everything that's happening throughout the world. A lot of us are feeling that pressure and the uncertainty. One of the biggest triggers of the nervous system when it comes to this work is the unknown. And so if we can keep that in mind, that this is a time of the unknown, but what I like to do is help reprogram. So that's part of the process, is reprogramming the subconscious mind. We want to reprogram our physical responses. We want to reprogram the words that we use when we work with money, how we talk about money. We want to reprogram the mind also to look forward to the unknown, because if we look forward to the unknown, what we can recognize is that is also the place where all of our gifts come from, our blessings, all the amazing, wonderful things come from the unknown, but we're conditioned and trained to fear it instead of embrace it. And so by giving yourself the space to get it all out of your mind. So journaling is a wonderful way to do that, just getting it all out. One of the other techniques that I use is called EFT, It's also known as the emotional freedom technique.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very unique way that I use the tool because, to be honest with you, for many years it didn't work for me. I learned about it almost 20 years ago for the first time, and many people would bring it to my attention or mention it, and every time I tried it, it didn't work until I understood that I was afraid to really express those deeper feelings and emotions. Once I gave myself permission to say, you know what, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to let it out, it's okay for me to do that, then the technique could actually work. And so EFT, I'll just give a little brief explanation of what that is. It's basically, if you think of acupuncture, where you would go and you would receive needles that would be placed within certain in a certain pattern or algorithm according to what is known as your meridian system. The meridian system is this energetic highway, we call it, that runs through us. And those needles, when they're placed very gently in certain spaces, will open up those various channels. And so they can relieve pain, they can relieve pressure, they can create different experiences and help people physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. And so what we do with tapping or EFT is we do the same thing without the needles. So instead of placing those needles, we are tapping on those meridian points in a very specific pattern with a very specific intention. And it has a very, like the same type of an effect that we can have with acupuncture. Now, what makes EFT different is we're using our voice. So while we're tapping, we're saying words, we're expressing how we feel. I have a very specific pattern that I use for EFT, and I can share it here. It's very simple to follow. You can do this on your own. Once you look at look up just the various points of where the points are, and there's just a few of them that you can keep sort of working with. And what I do is I start with the pain point, or I start with the discomfort. So if we're talking about money and let's say feeling a lot of fear around that or uncertainty, that's where I would start with someone, and I would have them just pour out their mind and their heart of what's going on while they're tapping. And what you're doing is, first of all, you're expressing it, which not many of us have a safe place to do that. We have a lot of guilt or shame sometimes about how we feel, or that we even feel these things, or that we're in a situation that we might feel like, how did I get here? How did this happen to me? And so by tapping and just honoring that, letting it come out, while you tap, you're sending a signal to your body that it's safe. So it shifts you out of that fight or flight mode, which is resistance, which is agitation, which is running away or even freezing or panicking. You're shifting chemically within the body over into a parasympathetic response. And the parasympathetic response is rest, digest, ease. And we don't always connect ease with money, but while you tap and you express and you move through this pattern, your physical body starts to respond and relax and let go. When that happens, we often have more access to the subconscious mind, that part of us that is hidden from our present awareness, but it's a large part of our autopilot behaviors and default ways of thinking and feeling and our actions. Recent studies in psychology show that over 80% of our daily actions and behaviors are actually running on autopilot from the subconscious mind. So while we're tapping and saying these things, we're accessing that part of us that we usually don't have that much access to. And so what happens for people is they're tapping and they're speaking and they're saying these different things. And in that process, I'm guiding them on what to say or using their own words right back to them. All of a sudden, because they have access to the subconscious mind, they might have a memory pop into their head. And that memory might be 7 years old, 8 years old. All of a sudden, you might see mom sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of bills and her head in her hands, stressed out. And you might not realize that in that moment when you saw that, there was probably a physical reaction. You didn't know what to do with it because you were probably a little child, right? So all this can come up while we're tapping. And the beauty of that is you're not creating it. You're not
Mhm.
manifesting it, you are letting it out. And so it's likely unprocessed or unfinished, as far as an emotional situation occurred, or sometimes it's just something we didn't know even
Mhm.
impacted us, that's there, that's running behind the scenes. And so
Mhm.
that kind of stuff can come up while we're tapping. So that's why I love it as a tool, because and it's one of the reasons I believe they call it the emotional freedom technique, is you are freeing yourself up from what's
Mhm.
already there. You're not creating more of it. You're not calling it into your life. You're actually liberating yourself from these
Mhm.
patterns and beliefs and thoughts and memories that were likely holding you hostage on some level, just enough where you didn't think about it. You maybe didn't even realize it was happening, but all of a sudden you're feeling it when you go pay that bill or ask for a raise or make a financial decision. And that's why I say we have these emotional or financial glass ceilings. Those
Mhm.
ceilings are an exact reflection of what we have unconsciously decided is safe for us to receive. And even
Mhm.
though the logical mind would say, well, this doesn't feel safe to me. I want to allow in more money because that would be amazing. That would feel great to me. That's the conscious part of you. But the subconscious is the part of you that's actually making the decisions and deciding what's okay and what's not okay. Now,
Mhm.
imagine if you have an association that money means negative attention, you're not going to let it in even though you want it. Or if
Mhm.
you have a belief that money is the root of evil or causes more problems, or maybe you adopted that kind of a belief from the ancestors or various just influences as a child,
Mhm.
teachers, even neighbors, things like that. That's why we will have those blocks or those financial glass ceilings. We will have those levels of resistance because on some other level, another part of us made that
Mhm.
decision. So we have access to that part of us while we're doing the tapping. Now, here's the other beautiful thing: is if you're not sure, or if tapping feels a little scary, or like a
Mhm.
really big step, you can do the when you journal, when you write. The other thing that's great about journaling is you will
Mhm.
also start to access your
Yeah.
subconscious mind. So
Mhm.
after, and especially if you write with pen, and
Mhm.
especially if you do a little bit of like deep breathing and try to relax before you journal, the longer you go, the more you actually change your brainwave states, which
Mhm.
will influence that state of consciousness in the present moment. And you'll start to all of a sudden pick up on things within the subconscious. So
Mhm.
it's not all bad stuff either. There's a lot of beautiful things that come from the subconscious. We can have
Mhm.
ideas pop in, we can have beautiful memories that come up. So it's not necessarily negative at all.
Mhm.
But when we have a block or a trigger, that's why it tends to have that negative feeling, or I don't even want to say negative, but more of a feeling of discomfort, because
Mhm.
it's simply there to teach us or show us there's something here for you. And if you can write about it, if you can tap on it, you will have greater success in establishing a real, genuine form of healing or transformation
Mhm.
versus trying to talk yourself out of it, because that's very superficial within the mind. It doesn't sink deep into the roots of where we want
Mhm.
to create from.
Wow, it's quite a lot of information and very powerful because it's a lot of internal work, and like I said at the beginning, we always had the impression that manifesting or having money, it's something that come from the outside, and yet all this work that you're describing, going deep inside ourselves, understand what's stuck in our subconscious mind, it's actually the key to release everything and then bring something more positive that gonna help us manifest what we want and something positive at the end. So wow, that's just so amazing. So let's have another short break, and we'll come back and continue to look at the different aspect of the money blockages and the link with the emotions and how to remove it and to deal with the ceiling, the glass ceiling that we have in those areas. are back. We are back with Melissa, and we are going deep into ourselves because that's just so powerful what she's been talking about since we started. So one thing that I really wanted to understand, because listening to you, it looks like we actually in control of everything that's happening to us, and especially when we talk about money. So in a situation like the one we are right now, with something, a pandemic that we didn't know about happening, so that's really a surprise for everybody. How do you keep control and go through this process that you just described? Because like you said, there's additional emotion coming in. And because of the unknown of all of this, how do we refocus ourselves and start to manifest, something positive for us as far as, money or whatever wealth is concerned?
I love that. That's such a beautiful question, because it's something that I get probably every day over the last 7 months. It's come up continuously, obviously for the reasons of what we're experiencing in the world today. And so the thing that I like to start with when it comes to this question is understanding that when we're in fear, we're only accessing a certain part of the brain. We're operating from a very, very small level of our potential. Now, I don't mean small as in that we're not doing the right thing or responding wrong or not getting it right. It's about releasing all of that and knowing that the part of the brain that we are working with is really based in the emotional response of safety. Right. And so part of the brain that we're talking about here is called the amygdala. But when it comes to the actual response of what's happening to the world, so we look outside, and this might be to the media, this might be to just our friendships and our connections and our relationships and the people we engage with every day. And we're watching and we're taking in the sensory information. And the sensory information, as it comes in, we're making these automatic decisions about it, about our safety, about what we do have control over, like you mentioned, what we don't have control over. And so I like to think of it that we don't necessarily, just from my perspective, have control over COVID or scenarios like that. Yet at the same time, this is where our power comes in, is if you understand that when we're in fear, because we are only accessing a certain part of our ability to think and react, we're only going to get what's in that like little tunnel from that perspective, which means we're only going to see all the things that sort of trigger us or remind us of why we should be afraid. Doing this work widens that scope so that you feel more present, you feel more, you start to have a feeling or a sense of, you know what, the world is unknown. It is a little crazy out there. And I'm going to do what I need to do to tell my body that it's safe, which is part of the tapping, so that my mind will sort of release that tunnel vision focus on what I should be afraid of, and will actually start to think bigger than that. And what happens in this process is when you're putting your body into a state of greater ease, I want to say, because it's not always possible or easy at all to feel ease when we're afraid. But if we can work towards feeling better, feeling more relief, the more relief that we have, the more we set the body at ease, the more that the mind and the brain together help us to see more of what's possible and what's happening. And so how this looks for us is, let's say that you're watching the media and things look like they're getting worse, or you're watching the news or TV or something like that. It looks like things are getting worse. Well, there's usually a physical response that goes with that. Your heart might start racing. You might feel uncomfortable. You might feel sick to your stomach. You might have some racing thoughts that come with it. That's one of the first indicators that your nervous system is engaged and inflamed. And so if we work right there, just go right there, and you just can do some tapping, some deep breaths. You don't even have to know what to say. You will intercept that process, and you'll start to reverse it to go back into a sympathetic response. This is where everything changes for you. This is how we can get through these times, because the power you actually hold in the parasympathetic response is higher levels of consciousness. So imagine it this way. If we are focused on how am I going to put food on my table, which is the reality for many people, if we're focused on what am I going to do, I don't have a job, or I lost my job, or my income disappeared, it's really hard to think creatively. It's actually almost impossible because of the levels of the brain that you're accessing in fight or flight versus creativity. This is why if we decide, you know what, I don't know the solution, but what I am going to do is give myself the gift of at least trying to move into an internal state that feels a little better. Because if I work on that, I will have access to the ideas, the solutions, the creative prompts, all the other things that are here. My belief is that even through turmoil, there's a whole other world that exists at the same time. And this is why some people during COVID started to thrive. Some people started to make more money. Some people, all of a sudden, they lost their job and they went, I've been wanting to start a business for years. You know what? I've got no choice right now. I'm going to do it. And they did it, and it's working. So there's things like that where if we want to absolutely acknowledge what we're afraid of, what is causing that. We don't want to turn from that, but we want to breathe through it. We want to tap on it. We want to use the tools, because living in that is very different than feeling it. When we feel it, we can actually then expand into the other parts of the brain and the mind, where all of a sudden you have that beautiful idea. You know, I'm just going to reach out to a friend, and you call that person and they say, oh, I was thinking of you and I have this great opportunity. And all of a sudden connections are made. Those connections happen when we're in that parasympathetic response. It's really hard to acknowledge the ideas, the impulses, the intuitive nudges, whatever you want to call those, when we're afraid. Because when we're afraid, we're in reaction. But when we're in that parasympathetic state of a little bit more ease, a little more relief, ideas can come to us, solutions can find us. So that's why it's so important during this time it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid. Give yourself permission. Everybody's afraid. You know, many of us are scared. We don't know what's going to happen. And we have more power in that than we think, because our mind is telling us we don't. What am I going to do? What's going to happen? Right? That's where the mind goes. But if you actually really work with that part of you and you just say, you know what? I know you're trying to keep me safe here, but this doesn't feel good to me. I'm going to choose a different feeling by tapping and breathing. That relief feeling of I'll figure it out. There's resources. I'll figure it out. I always figure things out. That feels better. So the other thing I teach people to do is try to release the mind a little bit when you're feeling all of that pressure or fear or discomfort, and say to yourself, it's going to feel so good when I figure this out. I don't know what that is yet, but it's going to feel so good when I figure it out, because your subconscious is listening to you. So if you're saying that, while you're saying it, even though it's sometimes hard to feel it and believe it right away, your subconscious is taking that in. And if you really mean it, when you say to yourself, I'm going to figure this out, I'm open to solutions, your physical body will also respond to that initiative, that directive. And your brain will start to create, it'll start firing and wiring a different way. You will open to solutions. You will open to possibilities. So that's the amazing thing, is on the outside, it looks like magic, but on the inside, it is being very conscious and very clear and directing your mind and your thoughts and working with your feelings.
Wow, 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 wow. I hope you get all of this, because and have it written down, because that's a lot of information, and very important information that you need to be aware of, because it's especially right now, like I mentioned, with all those emotions that we go through, especially those emotions of fear, and being really afraid of what's gonna happen even the next day. So just understand that it's okay to be afraid, like Melissa was saying, and talk to yourself and reassure yourself that it's gonna be okay. Don't focus on, what's not going to happen or what you fear. So, I mean, it's been a great discussion, and, and 1 hour is never enough for those kind of, subject. But what is key, do you think, in this relationship that we have with, money and our emotions? What do you think is going to be key, not only for, the situation that we have? I think you've mentioned it, but also as far as, humanity is concerned, because, all those concepts that you describe, I don't think a lot of people are aware of them, because when we see the state of the world and what's happening,
Right.
there's every day more fear and more, catastrophe, personal catastrophe, if I can express myself that way. So how do we move forward, using the different techniques that you just defined?
Yes. So one of the things that I like to share with people that I feel like helps, it really can help, is if you can think of money as a mirror. Just simply think of it as a mirror for you. And that can be hard because it is very common for us to look outside and say, okay, but that's going on over there. This is happening in the economy. All this is going on over there. Yes, that's true. And what is it mirroring to you? Just like there's certain individuals that we will see throughout history and time, and whether that is in the government or entertainment industries or all throughout the world, there's different individuals that are influential, and we all see something different reflected back to us. We can agree sometimes on some of those reflections, and other times there's some discord, and we're seeing a lot of that in the world too. If we were to pull back from all of that and say, what is being mirrored to me with money? What is, when I say a mirror, think that money is a mirror and you're looking into it. What is it making you feel, or what do you feel? How are you responding to it? What are the thoughts that are going on there? And write that down. That has information for you that you can really start to uncover. That is a very quick way, believe it or not, to start this process, because it's the one thing many of us don't do. We have an assumption about, well, money is a form of exchange. Correct. But individually in our lives, it looks different for each one of us because of our beliefs and everything else. So money is a tool. It is a mirror. It is simply a magnifying glass. It doesn't change us, but we think it does. We think that having more of it or less of it will. And that's not true. It's honestly just reflecting what's already going on in the nervous system and in the mind. So that's one of the first keys also, is looking at that and saying, if I were to just even imagine and just to play around with the idea that money is a mirror for me, what is being mirrored? Well, for a lot of us, it's suppression. It is expression. It is not having enough. It is not being taken care of. It's not being heard. I mean, you can see all the different things that are coming out for people at this time. And so if you can look at that for yourself and say, what is being mirrored for me in the current events when it comes to money, you'll start to see some things and be able to start connecting those dots for yourself without really even having to investigate very far. It's very present. We're just not used to seeing it this way or looking at it this way. And the second you start making those patterns or connecting those dots, you'll see the patterns, and you'll start having these little aha moments of, oh my gosh, you know what? I do see that this is a pattern. And even though this time is amplified for all of us, this isn't a new feeling that I've had. It's likely been there already, but now there's such a magnifying glass on it. I'm really, really being urged to look at it. So that's what I feel one of our, if we could call it a gift, it's hard to label this as a gift, but if I were to say there is a gift that this time is offering us, that's one of the things, is to really look at what is true for us, to decide what is working, what's not working, and to have that clarity versus handing over our power. Like, there's nothing I can do about this. There may not be anything we can do to control the whole world or the economy at large with everyone everywhere. But we can start to change how we're responding and what we're doing, which will give you greater access to your inner resources that you weren't able to tap into before.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's been such a empowering and really inspiring session because like I said, a lot of us look at money as something external, not really looking at it as a mirror, like you said, that is reflecting who we are in a way. And I think it's worth noticing it and mentioning it because a lot of people talk about money being the root of evil, but at the end of the day, money is just a tool, like you said. It's static. It doesn't have any energy. The energy is us. So
Exactly.
if it reflects something evil, it comes from us. And if it reflects something else, it comes from somebody else, some from other values that we have. So it's important that we understand that it starts with us, like everything in life. It starts with us, and we're just creating and manifesting it, for the outside world. And that's the most important thing to have. So how do people, stay in contact with you? And is there anything, any courses, training, or services that you offer that you want us to be aware of?
Sure, sure. Well, the best way to touch base and to connect is honestly to go to my website, and it's melissacorter.com. And I have lots of different pieces there, blog posts, information, things like that. The one program that I work with people on, it's a one-on-one program because a lot of these things, even though we share common
Mhm.
beliefs or we share common experiences, it's a very personal journey. And so I have a 5-week program that I work with people on one, and we go through every part of the money. So we look at savings, we look at income, we look at debt, we look at income goals, and we look at
Mhm.
something that's called toxic money as well. And this helps us to
Mhm.
unwind all that stuff in the nervous system. And then I teach them the tapping. So you actually learn how to do the tapping through, and we do it together. Over those 5 weeks. So it's an entire protocol that we do, 5 weeks long. We get together for an hour each week for 5 weeks. I teach you the tapping, and
Mhm.
then you have a little bit of tapping homework that you do in between so that you can really start to feel a difference in your body. And very quickly, people start to see the results because they're
Mhm.
immersed in the work for about 5 weeks at a time.
Mhm. Fantastic. So I think you've, just like me, you've learned a lot today from Melissa. And make sure, if you want more information from her, to connect with her and also check our program and see, if it can help you, because I know that a lot of us right now are really, in fear of what's going on. And it's important that we understand that we are always in control, like what Melissa was saying. And it starts with us, and it's okay to be afraid, but we don't have to get stuck into the fear. There's an opportunity to go back inside, understand, what's going on, what are the blockages that we have regarding money and emotion, and remove those blockages. And I think Melissa can help you with that. So with that, we have, at the end of this conversation. It was a very good conversation, and I think, the audience, whoever is watching, and people, the majority of the people who are gonna watch the replay, I hope you're gonna enjoy it as I enjoyed it. And like I said, don't hesitate to connect with Melissa. If you can't, I can always connect you. That's not a problem. But make sure you reach out. Don't stay. Don't keep your blockages. If you can't do it on your own, please go to the specialist and make sure everything, and make sure that you are able to live the life that you want to live, and be free of this money prison or emotion prison, like I call it. So thank you, Melissa, and I wish you a great day and a great weekend. It's been a pleasure to have you today, and I again, say thank you for all the knowledge that you brought, the inspiration and the wisdom as well. that you brought into the platform and into the greatness, and it's been a real greatness engineering hour for us. So thank you. And to the audience, like I always say, don't leave anything on the table of life. The knowledge is there. You've had everything from Melissa, so don't keep it to yourself. Share it, and the most important thing is to apply and implement whatever Melissa shared today. And that's how, I know that I've done my job today, and just, knowing that you've been able to improve yourself and go to the next level of your greatness. So that's all for today. I will be back next week. And from now on, it's bye bye. Thanks, Melissa.
I thank you so much for having me.